and we were getting ready for a big celebration. We were winning everything, and all of a sudden it was just called off. The results tonight have been phenomenal, and we are getting ready. I mean, literally, we were just all set to get outside and just celebrate something that was so beautiful, so good, such a vote, such a success.
My name is Ben Burgis. This is Give Them an Argument. A while later, I am going to be speaking to Daniel Besner about an article that he wrote for Jacobin about a really weird incident about some war games in 2002. At the end of the episode, of course, there's Outlaws and Revolutionaries with the great David Griscom. But right now, I am joined by Adam Proctor, who is the host of Dead Pundit Society, and real heads may know that I used to be a co-host of the Dead Pundit Society, and even though I've been resurrected, I'm a living pundit now. Adam is a good friend and close comrade, and somebody I really wanted to talk with about what I want to get into for the next little while, which is all of the horrible shit that has happened this year from the perspective of the left, and the terrible place that we're in, and how to maybe navigate the balance between not lapsing into counterproductive nihilism and also not sounding like the voice you just heard, which would be the President of the United States, Donald Trump, reacting to losing an election by saying that it was very tremendous and that he won, which is honestly what a lot of the left sounds like to me from our perspective. So how are you doing today, Adam?
I'm doing okay. I gotta say, pardon the trip down memory lane and the shot to the feels, but my God, if our late friend Michael Brooks could be here to clown and cuck this man following his very public loss. Pour one out for Michael. That's the first thing that I thought about when I saw that clip. But, lots to be excited about, lots to be nervous about as the days go on. My excitement about Trump's very public and embarrassing demise wanes as we see the sort of cabinet, likely cabinet picks and the transition team that's being assembled by Biden. It looks like the same old shit, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. So Bernie was very publicly angling for the labor secretary position. In fact, I think I just saw he's got like the Sunrise Movement, like doing like campaigning for him for labor secretary. And that does, I think it's been made very clear that's not going to happen. There have been stuff all over mainstream media saying that it's very clear that they're not going to do that, right? Which a smarter version of Biden actually might neutralize him, but they're not going to. Elizabeth Warren was angling equally openly for Treasury Secretary, but again, it's been made pretty clear that's not going to happen, which is sad. That you're going to do all that to shiv the left and ingratiate yourself to the party establishment, and they're still going to leave you out in the cold. Meanwhile, the list of names, of course, we don't actually have appointments yet, but the list of names that we know have been vetted include people like Rick Snyder, who's the former Republican governor, or not Rick Snyder, sorry. Although Rick Snyder did endorse Biden, and that was touted, which after all the shit about Joe Rogan endorsing Bernie was awesome, right? This is the guy who poisoned the water in Flint, Michigan. And, I don't know that I'd give up my death penalty abolitionism for him, but God, I'd be tempted. But John Kasich, the notoriously union-busting former governor of Ohio, is on the list of people who've been vetted by the transition team for possible cabinet positions. Charlie Dent, who's a Republican congressman who resigned in 2018, and the moment, like the nanosecond, the legally mandated one-year cooling off period was over, he registered as a lobbyist and had declared clients that included pharma companies, health insurance providers. And, I'm sure that along with some, again, these are Republicans who is considering for the sake of bipartisanship, and rewarding the never Trumpers who he thinks delivered the win to him. But the Democrats are going to be mediocre, centrist Democrats, and it's not going to be Bernie. It's not even going to be, but that's going to be a particularly dire situation, I think, also for us, because you think, okay, we both wanted, Biden to win, right? I think we were both pretty clear on that.
Well, we wanted Trump to lose, right? Not so much Biden to win. Can we settle there?
Yeah. I mean, we wanted Trump to lose, knowing that unfortunately we're in a pass where the only way for that to happen, right, was for Biden to win, right, and for people in swing states to do what they had to do. You did a pre-election extravaganza episode of Dead Pundit Society, where you had, I think, probably the most memorable metaphor for that electoral decision that I've ever heard. If you want to just recite that real quick.
Which one was that? I don't know. I'm sort of fly off the seat of my pants most of the time when I'm on the mic.
I think that you were quoting Adolf Reed using this metaphor, but I think he was getting it from some old movie.
Oh yeah. So Dr. Reed has this amazing story from a totally not PC, totally not woke moment from a movie, I think in the 1970s. And it was something to the effect of, like, he was talking, the main character was a sort of like this very shy, now this is a secondhand telling of a movie that I've never seen, so bear with me here, but the metaphor is important. This kind of lovesick, heartsick guy who's kind of he's a bit of a virgin, not a Chad, and I'm not sure if he is a real virgin in the movie, but he's kind of scared of women, scared of sexual interaction, and he befriends this prostitute, the sex worker, and they're having a conversation about sex, and at one point she apparently, according to the good Professor Adolf, says something to the effect of, I'm gonna fuck this up, Ben. What is it? It's you care about it so much. So I care about it so little that I'll do it with anyone.
Right.
And you, the main character, care about it so much that you won't do it with anybody. And that's I mean, that sums up for Adolf and for us the voter fetishism that happens, right? Where you need to be like the sex worker here, the prostitute. You need to be like, you need to care so little about it that you'll vote for anyone and you'll move on and go on with your business, and not be like the the virgin who cares about it so much that he won't do it for anybody.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because instead of seeing voting as this profoundly weighted act, that which I think is what's implicit, is how I would never vote for Joe Biden or whoever, right? I would never vote for that person. Which, whatever, self-criticism, that's me, right? In some other elections in the past, that I was far too unchatish about this, but. Rather than saying
promiscuous.
That, right? Yeah. So you say, look, let's just just treat it like you have a choice about as what it is, right? You have a choice about what horrible thing is going to happen, and so you pick the horrible thing that you think you're most likely to survive, you think is most likely to go well for you, and for a variety of reasons, having a centrist Democrat in office is probably that, right, for the electoral context, that having that a centrist Democrat, like Biden, is certainly, to put on the commie hat, right, probably a old fur hat with a faded red star on it, right, certainly a class enemy. But not all class enemies are created equal, and they're going to pursue a different strategy for managing the system on behalf of capital. And there are both some concrete reasons and some discursive reasons why this is a fight that would seem better for us, right? That the concrete reasons have to do with things like, what Paul Prescott laid out in his article in Jacobin about the National Labor Relations Board, and the way that Trump has appointed hardcore union busters to those positions who were really aggressively crusading to stamp out what's left of collective bargaining in this country. And again, we have a better chance of surviving, the labor movement surviving the sort of softer co-optation strategies of the Democrats. And the discursive reasons have to do with the fact that if in a fight between everybody else and right-wing Republicans, the left can sort of seem like, oh, maybe irrelevant, or maybe we can make our case that we would do a better job of fighting them than liberals would, but then people doubt that, and they worry that we're just getting in the way of that. Whereas a fight between centrist Democrats and the left seems much more advantageous to us. I agree with all that.
Yeah.
But,
and so we in essence, to put it in short, what you just said though, like we need to squash this Trump derangement syndrome, because it's a terrible soil on which for the left to act on, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and really, I think a sign of how terrible a soil it is what's been happening in the last week or so, which is that while some of us are desperate to finally move on to talking about Biden and how bad the incoming Biden administration is going to be, what I certainly see, every day on my Twitter feed, for whatever that's worth, is constant and unhinged alarmism about how Trump is going to stage a military coup or start a civil war, that fascism is going to be, imposed sometime between now and January 20th.
The only person that has anything to worry from Trump at this point in time, as far as I'm concerned, is Roger Ailes. Because I think Trump might be serious about trying to challenge the supremacy of Fox News after this. It's a betrayal, folks. A betrayal. I won this election. It wasn't even close. But I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what comes.
Yeah, right. I mean, Ailes does have something to worry about from Trump, and I think it is entirely possible that Trump does some sort of strange, sad president in exile shtick for the next 4 years, and whatever. I mean, I think that could be an effective shtick for fundraising from the faithful, and if he spends the next 4 years floating the idea that maybe he'll run again, that could really screw things up for other Republicans who want to run in 2024. But I mean, it's about as serious a threat to democracy, in my view, as the mentally ill victim of neoliberalism who's living out in a street corner, where he's standing there yelling about how he is the legally designated emperor of the Western Hemisphere. It's no, I mean, this isn't, I think that Trump is not going to do anything. I mean, he's going to do the lawsuits, right? Which he has been doing. I'm not going to add to the 10,000 jokes that have been made about the total landscaping. But I think that the patheticness of that is representative.
He's definitely poisoned the well, right? I mean, he's definitely poisoned the well in terms of people's, understanding what legitimacy is in our elections and in our political system and all the rest of it. But I mean, that alarmism is real, and I share it. People, my family, friends of mine who still think this thing is rigged. I mean, he's poisoned the public health ideology in this country by, the virus, that's killing people, this kind of shit you run into in every day. If you don't know these people, you're just, I don't know, you need to make more friends outside your political circle, because it's very real. And so that's damaging. But I think what we're getting around, we're talking in circles about it, which is let's be explicit for the haters. If you have any, I don't know, you're such a likable guy, I don't know how you can have any haters. Let's get real. The problem is that the Democrats, right, the centrists, Biden's is not, they're obfuscating their role in that kind of process of delegitimation of the state and of the political institutions, and the ability of and the willingness of politicians to do anything that anybody wants or needs in the world. It's just, it's just another version of it's just another sideshow, right? At this point, and people know it. And so what the liberal pundits and the people who are clutching their pearls and shrieking about, Trump's coup is that they're not, they're just distracting from the real culpability of the mainstream establishment Democrats in this decline in trust and legitimacy of our state and its institutions. They are absolutely, I mean, they may not have been the pilot over the past 4 years. This plane that was going down wing is half shot off and the tail fins are dangling by a thread, and we're all hanging on for dear life. It was piloted by Trump, but it was co-piloted by the establishment Democrats all along the way. I mean, they're culpable, right? I mean,
well, certainly, right? I mean, if nothing else, just really concretely, the House of Representatives controls the purse strings, and the House is controlled by Nancy Pelosi. So there's literally nothing that Trump has done in the last 4 years that she hasn't funded, right? Like that the Democrats, couldn't have decided to defund, but that she didn't, for a variety of reasons, because in some cases there were things that she and other people in the Democratic establishment actually liked and agreed with, or other cases they were just fights, right, that she didn't want to pick at that moment, for whatever reason.
Let's be honest. The establishment corporate Dems are essentially throwing their bodies as human shields up in front of their big billionaire donor class right now to prevent these left-wing demands that are extraordinarily popular from reaching their target, right, and being implemented as policy. And you saw the results of that in the election. The election results for the Democrats were astonishingly and surprisingly and shockingly bad, with this GOP that should have been such an easy target, with this reality TV game show host at its helm. Should have just been, one of the easiest elections to pull off in modern human history. Instead, these establishment pundits have deluded themselves into believing that, the people give a shit about, the kind of the adult in the room discourse, rather than, paying attention to, their jobs, their livelihoods, their prospects in the world. Surprise. Surprise.
Absolutely.
Material demands win every time, don't they? I mean, I just saw a stat that every single candidate who was pushing, who had co-signed the Medicare for All bill won their reelection bid.
Yeah, absolutely. And the stat that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since I heard it is that Trump won Florida, of course. Take a beat for the fact that we were told that Bernie couldn't be the nominee because he'd lose Florida because of the Miami Cubans. Right. But Trump won Florida, but a $15 minimum wage won in Florida by more than Trump did. Which, again, I'm no doubt at all that most people who voted for the $15 minimum wage voted for Biden, but it's mathematically impossible. There weren't people who voted for Trump and also who voted for that. Which goes to the point that oftentimes people will sort of caricature what people in the Bernie movement and elsewhere were saying as, we're saying that there's this vast pool of untapped left-wing voters out there. Right. And that's not it at all, right? That most ordinary people, and this is not a slam, this just means they have better things to do with their lives, don't have like fully well thought out, internally consistent, they
don't have an ideology at all. It's not a false consciousness argument in terms of like, well, they're really out there. They really believe in these like, coherent, like consistent left-wing ideas. No, they really need shit.
No, exactly.
Obviously, right? Because
like most people, like those
food, housing, and healthcare are not optional in this world, and so that's the argument, right?
No, exactly. Like most people, right? Ranging from the people that you're talking about, right? Who might be friends or relatives who believes that Trump won, up through your average like person on the street who hates Trump's guts. Most people don't have political worldviews. They have, they have some political reactions to things. They have some political instincts. A lot of times different reactions and instincts point in wildly different directions, which is the point that means that different people with very different standpoints could possibly appeal to them in different elections with different programs. And as that $15 an hour in Florida stat shows, one of the best ways of breaking through to people who might not necessarily agree with you on a lot of other issues is by saying, hey, wouldn't it be good if you made more money, right? Wouldn't it be good if you had healthcare, etc. And of course, I mean, granted, one problem, I think it's a problem everywhere, actually, as shown by like what happened with the last general election in the UK. That is that lots of people are so demoralized because we live in a neoliberal hellscape that they don't actually believe that politics can even achieve these things, you know. So it doesn't matter if you give them, you know, a Christmas wish list of things that sound great. They think, yeah, okay, obviously I'd support that, but you know, whatever. I know none of that's going to happen, right? Like the real thing is whether Brexit is going to happen or not. So I'm going to vote based on that, for example, in that case. But the claim is not that there are like millions of people who agree down the line with DSA on everything who don't vote.
I think we need to be real about this. Most Americans abhor the idea of even having an ideology.
Right.
It's gross. It's cringe. It's weird. It's like, get over yourself, dude. I mean, think about every obnoxious guy. It's usually a guy, not always, at the office or on your Facebook friends list. Not the people who are not us, right? We're fucking weirdos. We're politicos. We're weird birds. Just a random person. You know, the most obnoxious person they can think of is usually someone who's like highly what they would call ideological, right? And so, like, you know, the reality is that most people would have held their noses and voted for Bernie Sanders in a hypothetical general election, you know, in spite of his socialism, because they love the material offer so much. And so what you had in this election was these establishment Dems sort of running the ideology, as the late chairman Fred might have said, you know, running ideology in the respect in getting the worst of both worlds. That on the one hand, you're going to get the socialism smear because you have elements like the squad inside your party now. It's something you have to deal with. It's an essential part of your base. It's your like 90% of your activist base in terms of getting out the vote and the rest of it. So you have that discursive liability, right? And when you're talking about the Gusanos in Florida or these other types of more sort of reactionary, ethnic, formerly democratic ethnicities that you used to be able to count on for checking those demographic boxes. Demographic inevitability, right? This looks to be dissolving in front of our very eyes. But anyway, so you eat shit there. But you also eat shit because you're not providing a material offer of any kind to bring people on side. And so, you know, and you get the worst of both worlds in that way. You know, people absolutely would have held their noses and voted for Bernie Sanders if he was pushing that material offer in that way. But what happens is you get smeared as socialism anyway. You're offering them nothing of substance. And in fact, you know, Biden's reputation across the country, I think, in terms of the COVID response was just like, well, have fun sitting at home and not getting paid.
Right.
You know, and so, and that's the image that immediately pops into mind of workers across the country with respect to the grown-ups in the room. Yeah, the grown-ups shut down the economy and you don't get paid, motherfucker. You know, like sign me up for that. You know, like I don't care how much Trump as a clown. You know, like I got to get paid. You know, how am I going to put food on the table? So it's the worst of both worlds.
Given the options of what Trump was proposing, which is pretending the virus doesn't exist. Pretty explicitly at some points. Like he said things in the last weeks of the campaign, like what Biden is telling you is no more, you know, no more weddings, no more high school graduation parties, right? Doesn't that sound terrible? So Trump is offering enjoy your life and pretend the virus doesn't exist. And Biden was offering, we're going to acknowledge it. We're going to do something about it, but it's going to be at your expense. And then it turns out, you know, more like the crisis is serious enough that more people went for the second thing, but also the fact that it was so fucking unappealing shows up in the fact that what was expected to be a blowout, what should have been a blowout, was such a nail biter that we had to wait 4 days to find out who won.
Yeah, and all because why? Because Biden couldn't do something as simple as what Justin Trudeau in Canada has done, and what people across the country, in New Zealand and Australia, you saw it across Europe and the Asian world, you know, in small, tiny countries like Singapore, for fuck's sake, ask people to stay at home and compensate them handsomely for doing so, right? I mean, just even a minimal, you know, $2,000 guaranteed subsidy throughout the duration of the pandemic should have been the primary demand. It should have been printed on every flyer, every mailer, from Abigail fucking Spanberger all the way to Rashida Tlaib on the spectrum. That should have been the central demand coming out of the Democratic Party. But again, these establishment Dems are veritable human shields, holding themselves up arm in arm between the left and the needs of the people on one side, and their billionaire donor class behind them. You know, and you might throw some, you know, the PMC kind of paid prize fighters, as Marx might have said, you know, in that bunch as well, for sure. But you know, and that's where they see their role, and that's why they're doomed, and that's why we're fucked. if we don't outflank them in the coming two years, certainly before the swing election that's inevitable, I think, in 2022, and in 4 years when you very well could see someone with the politics of Trump, but some perhaps like some like political effectiveness. So again, the worst outcome in both. At least Trump was he was a buffoon. Right. He couldn't get anything done. He didn't have a coherent strategy. And don't listen to anybody who tries to tell you that, I've heard a lot of takes now, and it's coming from the British media, a lot of it, people are still kind of lost on this Trump fan fiction from 2017, aren't they? It's like, look, guys, he's not a criminal mastermind. I'm sorry. I've heard this coming from people with whom I otherwise agree. I've heard this take coming from Adam Tooze, even a brilliant man such as he, Trump is not a brilliant criminal master. Neither is Bannon, by the way. But Bannon's got a lot more credibility in that regard than Trump does, and that's saying something. So, but what we're setting ourselves up for in 2024 is a guy with the ideology of Trump, the ideas of Trump, the aims of Trump, but someone who's actually good at it.
Yeah, right. I mean, the fact that Trump, again, he's not a criminal mastermind. He's also, by the way, like, to believe, just to bring this back around, to believe that we're going to have like a real serious tanks on the street coup. And I know that some of you are listening to this say, Ben, this is a straw man. Nobody's saying that. To which I'd say, like a few days before I was recording this, I was seeing a bunch of people say all sorts of alarmist things about, oh my God, Esper's gone. Trump is putting Trump loyalists, in charge of the Pentagon, and definitely suggesting that meant that there was going to be an actual military coup. And to believe that, you'd have to believe that both he was much more of a criminal mastermind than he is, and also that he was much dumber or else much less greedy and self-serving than he is.
Also more heroic, right? That's what you were getting at. Like, Trump's a pussy. He's a pussy. He's not going to risk his life for this. He's got fucking golf to play. He's a billionaire. He's got pussy to grab. He's not going to go down fighting this fucking weak, a frail excuse of a man. It doesn't have any values that he would die for. That's the
not
big,
at all. And like
you guys are thinking, literally swallowing and perpetrating his own ideology. His like Mussolini-esque, ideology. Trump would shit his pants and empty his bank accounts, in order to avoid the fate of Mussolini.
No, exactly right. Like even if he did somehow convince some generals to stick their necks out for him, and I don't know why they would do that, but even if he did, then he's still doing something that has almost no chance of success, that has extreme risk to him. Yeah, as you say, it's buying into his branding. It's like, remember when he said after one of the school shootings that if he was there, even if he was unarmed, he would have like rushed in to the school to like take on the shooter himself. It's like, yeah, sure you would, right?
Yeah.
Trump, Trump is not a mastermind. Bannon's definitely not a mastermind. Bannon basically has really good branding, which, by the way, is why I've always thought that, when Red Scare had him on and people got mad at them for doing that, however they saw what they were doing in that conversation, I've always been glad they did, because usually when people argue with Bannon, they really feed into his Prince of Darkness branding. But like instead they were like, hey, you say you're a populist, why don't you support Medicare for all? What's up with that? Yeah. Which is exactly the right way to take on, people like this. So given that, Biden is becoming president, right? Maybe maybe in 2 months we'll all be in concentration camps and I'll have to eat my words, but I really don't think so. So Biden is becoming president. And we said earlier, we think, okay, discursively, this works out better for us. No more Trump derangement syndrome, mixing up the issue. And I still think that's true. But the thing that really particularly sucks about it is actually two things, right? One, when I talked to Glenn Greenwald, what he pointed out, which is that just because Trump's not going to be president anymore, that doesn't mean that like seeing fascists behind every corner is going to go away, right?
It's a good grift if you got it right. I mean, that's the big thing. What I meant to say earlier is, it's not only very lucrative to sort of build a political network, a political community on Twitter and write your books and take the speaker circuit and all the rest of it. It's lucrative monetarily and for your career, but in terms of the audience, it has a very kind of, it's a big psychic reward there, right? To believe that you and your people are standing between the only thing standing between, imminent despotism and tyranny and all the rest of it. It's the same cosplay scenario you've seen from the liberal center, the extreme liberal center over the past 4 years, and now it's just sort of magnified. It's the last sputtering gasp of that cosplay, isn't it?
Yeah, and I'm worried that, but I'm worried that its death is going to be very protracted, and that we're not like going to really see it behind us nearly as much as we should with Trump not being president anymore, because there's always going to be some Republican state representative in Montana saying something insane, about how all the liberals should be shot or whatever. There's always going to be some like backwoods militia thing going on, that you can point to.
They're locked in a two dual-sided existential battle with one another, aren't they? I mean, both sides of that grift. One side happens to be extraordinarily more dangerous than the other.
Of course,
right, of course. And let's not get, the survivalists will actually, the militia types will actually try it, whereas the liberals are I don't know, fish out of water off Twitter.
Right. No, for sure, right?
You're going to see QAnon versus Elanon or something. I don't know. Like, what's going to be? It's just going to get silly. There's no question about it. And the question is like, will the discourse around Biden, be reduced in that culture war babble over the next 4 years? If it does, we're fucked.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so I'm very worried about that, right? And then that we're not going to be able to break out of the kind of culture war that we've been stuck in, for the last few years, certainly. Mm-hmm. I mean, in some ways for a much, much longer time, but like, particularly awful form in the last few years. And then secondly, there are still these special elections coming up in Georgia. And so it's just barely possible that there's like the slimmest possible Democratic majority in the Senate. But that's probably not going to happen. Biden is probably going to have a Republican Senate, which, by the way, is why Wall Street responded with ecstasy to the election results. Because why wouldn't they, right? Because they've got everything, right? They've got a president who will take the virus seriously and not cause chaos. And they've got a Senate that guarantees that their taxes won't go up at all. Yeah,
it's a win-win. It's just gangbusters out there on Wall Street. It's kind of convenient though that the Pfizer announcement came out with the vaccine trial this week, because it's not now. It's like they have a lot of splaining to do if Wall Street just skyrocketed and the only news was that Biden looked like the clear winner, wouldn't they? But now they're like, well, probably because of Biden, but also the vaccine. Sure, yeah. It would be a lot more awkward for sure.
Right. Like, and by the way, I think we've got to give like everybody's crazy uncle this, that there is a political component to the fact that they announced this when they did, and not like a week and a half earlier, because what they were announcing wasn't they weren't announcing, hey, this has cleared everything and it's ready to go. What they were announcing was, looks good so far. We've got a few more weeks to be sure. So it's like, well, hold on. You couldn't have given us a look, I think that the Trumpist reaction to this is actually right? I mean, like that it is a political thing, and it does indicate that they prefer Biden to Trump, which why wouldn't you, right? Like it's like give credit where credit's due. I think I'm stealing this from the guys on the Citations Needed podcast. They've got a good line about when they're talking about media bias, when they say, yeah, sure, the media is biased against Trump. Of course they are. They're also biased against cancer, right? Like that's not, that's not it. Like, there are basic reasons why, these blood-sucking corporations would dislike Trump that actually in some cases overlap with the reasons why people with the opposite interests would dislike him, which is that having a mismanaged or really unmanaged plague run rampant through society is bad for business, right? It's also it's also bad for everything else.
Yeah, and just from a macro perspective, to channel my old mentor Leo Panich on this, is that markets don't run by themselves. You have this thing called the relative autonomy of the state, But that also means that the state has to function within the parameters of the market, but the market also has to function with the coordination of the state. And you need state managers to step in a competent and serious way to help coordinate the economy and all of its complexity, so that these bastards can keep making their billions. And they understand that there's only a degree of flexibility in those arrangements where they talk about, well, we need to deregulate and let the markets rip, and but not too much though. Please, daddy, come back, save us. Now, and Biden's daddy's coming back to save the day and to coordinate the economy, to re-regulate in a rational way, which means a profitable way, a way that's going to be continually profitable for everyone, such that a systemic crisis doesn't, come down on them and all of us. So, it just goes to show. And I think, but we also need to be really careful about this too, because you didn't ask the question, but I'll answer it anyway. We need to be serious about the importance of managing the economy, though, at the same time.
Of course.
And it's like, I think if the left is going to see itself, and I know you sort of brought me on to riff about the left over the next 4 years, and right? My whole thing, and I'm going to be I've always been hammered. I've been hammering on it. I'm going to continue hammering. I'm going to double, triple down on it. Is that the left needs to get serious about what it means to be serious. The left needs to get serious about what it means to seriously portray itself as a competent, legitimate form of authority and power in society, that we are actually challenging for political power, even in the state. And we know what it takes, and we're ready to do what it takes. And something about what it takes is, it has to be being serious and being mature and being a grown-up left, joining the rest of the global left in its maturity, right? Something that the South and Central American left has long known is that if you want to be serious and you want to be able to take power, you have to be able to manage an economy. And how much shit did Mas get? The Movement for Socialism in Bolivia a couple of weeks ago, when their new leaders were talking about the importance of beefing up the economy. From American Twitter leftoids, right? They're like, these guys are so, it just goes to show that there's neoliberals in the government now, and they aren't the real Marxist left, because they want to boost the economy and get jobs for people. They're grifters.
If they were like real, appropriately hardcore socialists,
they'd smash the state.
It would be. Yeah, they'd smash the state. They would be
with a big hammer,
indifferent to all consequences of anything that could happen.
Yeah.
Which, for people in Bolivia who are starting out with a living standard that is unfathomably worse, than the living standards of the people who are making these comments. And also, whatever. I guess it's maybe this is my this is my Trotsky showing, but if you even could achieve full socialism in one country, it certainly wouldn't be Bolivia.
That's right. No, I don't think so. No, you'd sooner start in Mississippi or something. In terms of economic power,
this is not a,
like military capabilities and all the rest of it.
This is not a slam on
financial power. There's like more financial power in Biloxi, Mississippi, or I got that right. Yeah, that's Mississippi.
Yeah.
Then it's on the border. I know.
Yeah.
Then in all of Bolivia, and so
right. Which is not anything bad about Bolivia. It's just that yes, this is a country that's been severely underdeveloped by colonialism and imperialism, and so even like getting up to the level of an economy that hasn't had those experiences would be a dramatic, quantum leap forward. And they're certainly not going to exist in hermetic isolation from the world economy, without really having famines and just not to mention extreme authoritarianism, because that's the only way to get people to live with famines, without doing anything about it. And so, I don't think, I think that if being a properly radical socialist means that you think that Bolivia should become North Korea, then properly radical socialism doesn't sound very appealing to me.
Nor anyone else. And so
Nor
you're
anybody
gonna have a
else.
lot of people to shove into the gulags. I'll tell you right now, starting with me and pretty much everybody else, who, by the way, can throw a better punch than you and they're better armed than you are too. So good luck with that. The democratic road to socialism is the only one that's available to us. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm very sorry to say. I know it's not that fun. It's not much like a movie. It's very much unlike 1917, perhaps, but it's the only one that's available to us right now, and so we have to deal with that. But again,
exactly. And by the way, like, let's not miss the fact that this is actually a rare spot of extremely good news for the global left. That, like, as much as they might not be Bolshevik enough for some people on left Twitter, the Mas, when Morales was in power, did tremendously improve life for ordinary Bolivians, with reforms, because that's what's available, at that historical juncture in that country at that time. And it was removed by an actual fascist coup, right? Like, it wasn't that there was some Bolivian equivalent of Trump who had press conferences and tweeted for a month, but like the actual, like, real serious kind where the military tells the person who won the election they have to step down. And it was defeated, which is amazing and very rare. Otherwise, what's happened in the last year, I guess you can also include AMLO's victory in Mexico. I think more complicated politically, but but a good thing. But otherwise, what's happened last year was, the absolute boy went down in flames in the UK. Bernie Sanders lost the primary in the US. We are going to have a Biden administration that looks like it's going to be a Biden administration with some golden excuses for not doing much of anything to help people. Most obviously a Republican Senate. So we're going to spend the next couple of years at the very least hearing people say, "Oh, you foolish, irresponsible leftists don't understand how the political process works. You don't know that Biden actually couldn't do anything that he's not doing because the Senate would stop him."
Yeah, Cocaine Mitch is gonna step in and stop him. We're gonna see a real Cocaine Mitch after he's like, weekend at Bernie's there, and his handlers are just like rubbing pure Peruvian flake under his gums to get him to preside over the Senate. He doesn't look well, man. He doesn't.
No,
I don't wish death
doesn't.
on anybody, but my man McConnell is struggling.
Yeah. He should be, his donors should agree to release him so he can spend what time he has left with his family.
Yeah.
But and then also the fact that the virus has caused this economic meltdown, which is partially recovered, but we're also looking at new lockdowns probably.
For sure.
I think there's very little chance of, like, the kind of serious Keynesian stuff accompanying that might actually, like, sufficiently blunt the economic consequences of that. So told, hey, look, I know you guys, want Biden to do the New Deal, but come on, we're the economy is in shambles and there's a Republican Senate. He's doing the best he can, is what we're going to hear from everybody for the next couple of years. And I'm pretty pessimistic. Obviously I will, do what I do, and I'm sure I'll write about 500 articles for Jacobin in the next couple of years saying, hey, Democrats say that Biden couldn't do anything about X, but here are 5 things he could do about it, right?
Yeah.
And I'm happy to do that, and I think it's good at least to arm people, who start out basically agreeing with us so they know what to say to people who say stuff like that. But I'm also not optimistic that we'll make that much headway, for one thing, because we already saw this. We've seen this movie before. This was the Obama administration.
Yeah.
And even somebody like AOC said not that long ago in an interview or one of the Twitch things she does, whatever, something like that, right? That and I'm not an AOC hater. I'm very glad that she's there. As somebody who calls herself a socialist and advocates a lot of important things, but she was even saying things like, well, Obama might not have been as progressive as I like, but he did what he could, Republicans, yada yada. So even 12 years, so I guess, like 12 years after Obama took office, 4 years after he left office, even the best people in mainstream politics, some of them are still parroting this line. So I'm not super optimistic about our ability to dispel it.
I'm not. I mean, I'm not. I don't think you brought me on to like defend AOC in the squad, but you might get it though.
Go for it.
It's like I think that might, you're going to catch her saying that. And look, I'm not here to stand for AOC and everything she's ever said. I'd love to be one. I'd love to advise her. I think she'd be an open ear and whatever. But who's to say who's in her ear and where she's coming from? The stuff she ranges, her statements, public statements range from like, oh, fuck yes, to all the way to like just pure cringe. But at the same time, they're pushing back. I mean, you've seen AOC go to war, on at least on Twitter. We'll see what's happening behind closed doors. You saw Rashida Tlaib being the first to sort of clap up Abigail Spanberger when she scoffed the socialism stuff. And their first caucus call immediately following the election. You saw Ilhan Omar, Representative Omar, go after Hakeem Jeffries, like it's basically by name, when Jeffries was saying, when choosing between, high-minded ideals and governing, we adults in the room are always going to choose to govern. And Ilhan, clapped him up in a quote tweet and basically said, like, what the fuck makes you think that like seeing to the needs of your constituents is in any way, in opposition to governing? Like that, if that's not what you're doing when you're governing, then you're doing it wrong, And so you've got and then you've got Bowman, you've got Bush, you've got a lot of other people who are coming in with even more stridently socialist and humanistic ideals. And so I think that you're seeing the beginnings of a real fighting bloc in Congress. And so, I mean, I hear you. It's a horribly dispiriting time to be a socialist right now. You've got the failures of Sanders and Corbyn, and, what happened in Bolivia and all across the pink tide is not faring well, and they're falling prey to their own contradictions. And just because we're pro Evo on your show, and we're pro Mas and pumped about the success that they're having in Chile and overturning the Pinochet era constitution and all the rest of it, doesn't mean we aren't super aware of the limitations of the pink tide. And we should be working with leftists across the country or across the world to learn lessons, to do it better this time and next time. It's a very dispiriting time in many ways, to be on the left, but like we should take heart in the fact that the sentiment, the needs haven't gone anywhere. I mean, that's what we found in Bolivia. Right. I mean, you see, they didn't even need a second round of voting. It was 53, 54%, something like that. They didn't go, despite the fact that, the indigenous trade union movement in Bolivia was being like brutalized and murdered over the past couple of years. Over the past year, at least explicitly, they didn't go anywhere. Their minds weren't changed. Their needs weren't changed. The structural contradictions that they're facing in that country hadn't changed. And so when they had an opportunity, they enthusiastically voted, the socialists back in. And I think, that's what you're going to see across the country. But it's going to require the political leadership to change course.
Yeah, and by the way, I should just say, right, to anybody who's listening to this who might be confused about the point about the pink tide and all of that. Of course, if the question is pink tide good or pink tide bad, yeah, good, of course.
Good,
right? No question.
Good, very
good,
easy,
very good,
quick, good. I choked on my coffee, shouting, screaming, good.
Yeah, and it's. But I think you can acknowledge that there are mistakes, that there are inherent limitations, that aren't even a matter of anybody making a mistake. And
this is what we call, high-minded Marxists call these structural contradictions, right? They're contradictions that are largely resulting of not, surely decisions that were made, but compounded collective decisions that sort of have a way of getting away from you. And of course, then it's also your material base that you're working with. What's the political economy of the country that you're dealing with? What are the capacities that are afforded to you by that political economy? I'm throwing a lot of jargon in here, but this is the way that we need to start talking. And this is how you talk about politics like a grown-up.
Yeah, well,
right?
that's the other
You
thing I
know?
want to clarify for anybody who might be watching this or listening to
Mm,
this, who might be confused about it, because the point, because I could see somebody saying, "Hold on, a couple of minutes ago, Adam and Ben were laughing at people who were upset that Evo, not Evo anymore, he's leading the Trade Union Federation, but his party, that Moss, isn't going to try to implement full communism, in the next year." And that they are in fact concerned with managing the economy. But then here you're saying that when people make parallel sounding, right, critiques of like the Squad, or the sort of beginnings of a socialist left, that's ridiculous. And both are true, right? The point is that if you're acting as if it was absurd to try to implement basic reforms that would make people's lives better, right? That's silly. But the other side of that is, if you think that, oh, okay, well, the reforms are nice, but why aren't you 1917ing yet? That's also silly. That
yeah.
that we do, when Adam talks about a democratic road to socialism, right? Like, we do have horizons that go beyond social democracy. We want to completely transform foundationally the structure of the economy, but that's not something that you can do overnight. You sure as hell can't do it in a small, undeveloped country that would die immediately if cut off from the world economy. But you can't even do it that way in general. That if you're going to build a long-term stable majority that wants to be on this road, then you need to do two things, right? You need to be doing things that are actually meeting people's needs, that are making their lives better, that that they can see what they're getting out of it. Nobody's ever going to support, like, look, if you want to talk about 1917, the Bolsheviks in 1917 didn't say you should support us because then we're going to you should support us because that will ultimately lead to a higher stage communism where we'll abolish the value form. What they said was land, peace, bread, right? That we're going to pull the country out of World War One. We're going to distribute land to landless peasants, and everybody's going to have bread. That's the kind of sales pitch that can actually work. And so, I think that you can and should think all three things, right? That you can't, that it's ridiculous to criticize people for not sort of going to 10 immediately, as if it were just a matter of will, as if the reason why we weren't living under socialism right now is because
they're not trying hard enough.
Yeah, it's because like you just have like
They only felt it a little bit more in their hearts, Ben. We could have gotten there by now.
Exactly, but also that we can get there, and meanwhile, that we can certainly have vastly more aggressive reform agenda than anything that these feckless, awful liberals would ever get behind. All three of those things are true. And I guess in maybe in our last few minutes together, like what I want to just kind of broaden out like the view a little bit, because something that I've certainly personally been struggling with a lot in the last few months, and I also know that like some of this is not like coming from sober political analysis. Some of this is impressionistic. Some of this is that that I'm probably a little bit depressed because everybody is, because we've been living with COVID since March, and as you alluded to at the top of the episode, a very good friend of mine died very tragically. Friend of ours, Michael Brooks, during that time, and so I'm sure the combination of those things, I'm probably looking at everything with I don't know, whatever the opposite of rose-tinted glasses is, that...
We're going to look back on this in a few years and be like, holy shit, that was a crappy year, wasn't it? You know what I mean? It's just going to be like, wow. Worth projecting ourselves in the future to think back on.
No question. But also, I guess you know, I mean, I've been thinking about this, right? Because it's like, okay, like what am I trying to do, you know, um, with this show besides just entertain people and show them my pretty face every week? And you know, I think a couple of things, right? One is to try to get people and you know, trust me, I know I'm speaking to the choir here. That's fine, right? You know that they have a, but I'm at least trying to get the choir to be a little bit clearer and a little bit more confident about the arguments for their positions. And the other thing, which is intimately related to the first thing, is that I'm trying to give the choir the sense of perspective that they'll need, right? To, at the risk of stretching this metaphor to hopelessness, keep singing. You
No,
know,
you preach
because,
just to steal a meta or whatever, a cliche metaphor, whatever, from an old black pastor somewhere. I'm sure you do preach to the choir, so they'll sing on tune, right?
yeah,
That's
yeah.
how you do it, you know.
Yeah, right, exactly. And I think some of that sense of perspective, you know, the sort of half jokey, although I do seriously endorse all three things, thing that I often tell people here is to, you know, read Marx, drink whiskey, and develop an appreciation for country music. All of those things will serve you better, right? You know, and through
Yeah,
all of
yeah,
this than
right.
than living or dying, you know, with
Mm-hmm.
the 24-hour news cycle. But I guess the thing that I really struggle with, the thing that I really want to pick your brain on in the last few minutes is just like, I know it's a big question. I know it's hard to answer concretely, but we don't want to just fall into counterproductive nihilism, right? You know, obviously we know we've all like. I mean, it's not like in 2019 we didn't know that there was a very long, steep road, and that the chances of failure were much better than the chances of success. You know, it's gotten a little steeper, right? But I'm not sure the calculation is fundamentally different. So we don't want to fall into counterproductive nihilism, but at the same time, we don't want to be like Donald Trump saying that I just had a tremendous victory, right?
Yeah.
Like just pretending like everything is fine
Mm-hmm.
doesn't do any good to anybody. Maybe it does a little bit good for them in the short term, but you're also going to burn out very quickly when you keep trying to project that on a world that's just obviously not matching it.
Man, I'm gonna give the Pollyanna report today. You ready? I'm not
Okay,
usually in
go
this
for it.
position.
Go for it.
I don't know if I agree with that last bit because I guess I mean I understand. I mean there's a lot to be bummed about, but I look at the raw sentiment on the ground
Okay.
and I think nothing's changed. The
Okay.
soil that Bernie flourished on. I like soil metaphors. You think I was like a farmer in a past life. The soil that nourished and sprouted the Bernie wave sprouted
Yeah.
from, right. I'm mixing metaphors now. You see imagine the Bernie wave is a corn stalk. Anyway, uh, it's still there, right?
Mm.
People still need healthcare. They want fucking. I mean, with the Fox poll and the Fox exit poll a couple Tuesdays ago, showed that up to 70% of the country is in favor of state managed healthcare. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean Medicare for all? Does it mean a public option? Like, who's to say? But this is a Fox poll, a Fox
Right.
News exit poll, right? So this is bipartisan, not nonpartisan, right? Because but partisan is the partisan part that fucks people's minds when it comes to thinking clearly about what they really want, what they really need. From everything right now to managing the economy in the face of COVID, to really so deep-rooted social issues are really sort of on the up and up for the left as well. We talk about the culture war, but some of this stuff really matters. In terms of
Right, of course.
how like quote cosmopolitan and progressive do you sort of imagine yourself to be? How much of a part of a larger sort of like world order, world system of just a general metrics of humanism or whatever are on
Yeah.
the rise and is cringy and is as sort of like minimalistic in terms of like a low bar. It's a low barrier of entry, right? But at the same time, like it's an important one, right? It's one that
Right.
if it wasn't there, I mean, we can lampoon these like liberal movies that are pushing trans rights and gay identity and all the rest of it and say, well, oh, it's this kind of liberal signaling or whatever. It's not going to
But
get
gay and
anybody
trans rights
fed.
are actually important. Like this, these are like
It's
fundamental.
it beats the hell out of that not being the sort of culturally hegemonic
Right.
machine that's on the rise, right? I mean, it's a good thing for progressive politics. It's bad news for the far right in that respect. There's a lot of reasons why people want to rebrand the Republican Party as a multi-ethnic party for workers somehow, right? You've seen a lot of people sort of put that out over the past couple of weeks because they see the writing is on the wall, right? Culturally, they're losing. But that's just to say that we got to get our shit straight. And I think like we have to, as a left, I mean, this audience, and I'm sorry, I give a lot of tough love. I hope I don't scare any of your audience away. Patrons are never wrong. I just want to, that goes for your show as well as my show. But, so if you disagree with me and you're a patron of Ben's, then I'm wrong and you're right. But that's an old maxim. But at the same time, we got to get real about ourselves. I put up a little tweet thread a couple of days ago talking about how laughable it was. It is that the people who fancy themselves as like storming, the German position or whatever at the Battle of the Bulge or what have you, back if they were only alive back in 43 or whenever it was, I don't know. Don't my World War II history sucks. These people can't even fucking stay home and they can't even fucking wear a mask to save American lives. And they fancy themselves like leaping over the trenches in World War I at the Battle of the Somme or whatever, right? Like these assholes can't stay out of fucking TGI Fridays, long enough to flatten the curve, to save American lives, and to get the American economy back up and running, right? And so why are we the left, right? The far left, the socialist left, not the progressive, wishy-washy. Why are we ceding the territory of like, say, something as like, fraught as like, say, patriotism, right? Why are we ceding these dominant narratives that we actually that Americans, normies, right, people for whom politics is not a hobby, normies hold these things dear, and we, the democratic socialist left, embody these ideals better than almost anyone. Why are we not wearing that on our sleeves, trumpeting it from the rooftops? We have got to fall out of love with this marginality that we've cloaked ourselves in for decades and decades and decades. And we have to be out loud, proud, shouting our insanely popular policies from the rafters. There are a lot of things that are stopping us from doing that. And assessing that with any real clarity would require probably another episode. And I don't want to go too deeply into that right now, but we have to be comfortable and confident with making priorities.
Yeah.
We have to be comfortable and confident about working in coalition with people who may or may not line up perfectly with our full buffet line of values and long-term aims. And then we have to get very clear about what our roadmap is and what it means to be a socialist. What our organizations, DSA, what is DSA for? What is its goal? What is its purpose? Having these debates out in the open like we used to, instead of behind caucus barricades for people who are interested in DSA inside baseball.
Yeah, right.
You name
it. I always thought that the purpose of the primary purpose of DSA was to was educational and to raise certain kind of socialist consciousness, but also to elect social democratic politicians, because I think that's the that's the most I think that out of things that an organization like DSA can do, I mean, I think short term, I think that's the thing to focus on. But it's certainly become clear in the last year or two that that not everybody involved in it sees things that way, and that is an important debate to have. I also, quite definitely like what you say about patriotism, because I think that this is something that that it's like the voting thing, right? That people get so invested in forming their identity around a contrarian sort of spirit when it comes to either stuff like this kind of civic act of voting, or in terms of like certain symbols that that they might associate with bad things, And what they really most want to do with these things is to differentiate themselves, to say, hey,
exactly.
I'm not like, right, everything else that's going on around me, that for all sorts of very good reasons I object to. But, you know, differentiating yourself, one, leads to, I mean, like, really, if that's your whole thing, that leads to subculturalism, which is just the death of politics. And two, like, differentiating yourself doesn't actually do anything to stop any of the things that you want to differentiate yourself
Nothing.
from.
We're doing what our friend, Matt Christman calls building ships in bottles. And then you're astonished to find with the outbreak of a global pandemic and the disappearance of our boy Bernie from the scene, that ship is not seaworthy, that it's a fucking ship in a bottle.
Right. Exactly. Right. Like if you actually have aspirations to do more than to just feel good about yourself because you're differentiated, then you should think about how you can make that sales pitch to everybody else who doesn't care about differentiating themselves, right? You know,
we need to think about it. I mean, the left. No, I like that. I like the way you're sort of breaking that down and articulating that in a much more sort of like sloganeering sort of. We could put this on a bumper sticker, which is important. I'm fucking verbose and I use too much jargon. We need more bumper stickers on the left, so I love that. But you know, if we need to, for the next 2 to 4 years, the left needs to think very seriously about how we're the same as everybody else,
right,
rather than how we're different.
Like what are the things that you actually have in common with your friends and neighbors and coworkers?
We're all trapped on this fucking rock together, and it's heating at record speed, you know, and the glaciers are melting, you know, and so if we don't start thinking about what we have in common and how our fates are intertwined and what we therefore have the same with our fellow humans, then, you know, we're fucked.
Yeah, right, exactly. And of course, you know, there are people whose economic interests mean that, you know, that they are, you know, that they'll never be won over. But most people who make political decisions that we like are not like that, right? Most people who make political decisions we don't like, whether that means supporting centrist Democrats against Bernie-crats, or whether that means voting for Trump or whatever, right? Like, are people who do need the things that everybody else needs.
It's easy, right? It should be an easy sell.
They need healthcare.
It should be an easy sell, Ben. But listen, nutritionists, right, have to convince you to eat Brussels sprouts. Okay? Nutritionists have to convince you that Brussels sprouts don't taste like warmed over piss 3 days later, because they do. They fucking taste like shit. And if you disagree, you're wrong. I'm sorry. Brussels sprouts are horrible. So nutritionists have an uphill battle. Okay? Reproductive health experts have to convince you that fucking is not as fun as chlamydia. Right? But in the moment, fucking feels way more fun than chlamydia. I don't care who you are, because that's not going to hit for another 6 to 7 days. So I read on Wikipedia. I swear to God, I read it on Wikipedia. So public health, like reproductive experts, have an uphill battle to convince people not to fuck so much, right? But we democratic socialists, like, compared to the nutritionists and the public health reproductive specialists,
we're not trying to sell Brussels sprouts. We're trying to sell.
We're just literally telling people, like, sucks that you don't have health care, doesn't it? Well, hey, what if you had it? Sucks that your job is terrible and you just got laid off. But hey, what if you didn't? You know, sucks that you name it. You know, it's like we are not selling. We don't have a difficult sell. You know,
we don't.
If we look at it in the right way.
Absolutely. And anything that makes it more difficult, the default at least should be, don't do that, right? So if you, you know.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean that it's not important, right? That's because what we're talking about is making priorities. And when you talk about it, like, when you talk about it in the kind of jokey way about Brussels sprouts and fucking, it's funny and it's everyone can sort of agree with it. When you say making priorities, you know, it's people get their back up and they say, whoa. Are you saying that, you know, this ... whatever issue isn't important? And it's like, no. I didn't say it's not important. Well, in fact, we're saying it is important, because if you want to build the actual concrete material political power necessary to ultimately one day address that issue, we're going to have to do these things first.
Yeah,
in order to build the
and
forces.
and I think that there are going to be situations where there are things that actually all matter to you. That, you know, life and politics being what they are, you actually have to make decisions about, you know, certainly what to prioritize. You know, maybe even in some cases, you know, like what to sacrifice in some situations. And those are very difficult decisions. But the decisions that shouldn't be difficult are decisions about symbolic bullshit, right? So,
Yeah.
if you think that, like, you know, like the imagery of like American flags and stuff, like you associate that with imperialism, and you for very good reasons you hate imperialism. Okay, fine, right? But then again, you also know that most of the people that you're trying to convince have much better associations with it, and there are all sorts of different narratives you can craft about that. Um, you know, Michael Harrington's thing about how, you know, if the left wants to change this country because we hate it, you know, people won't listen to us, and they'll be right not to listen to us. To be a socialist is to see the seed beneath the snow, right? You know, that there's stuff to work with, in you know, where the population as a whole is at, you know, where the country is at, even the in many ways very oppressive institutions that we would still have to take over and work with if we were to take power. And so whatever you decide about the harder questions, right? At least on the easier questions, right?
Let's be good. Let's do some good pedagogy here for this. You know, you're an instructor. I've been an instructor. Like, let's take this particular case, the American flag and imperialism, right? What are the two distinct ways you could handle this? The first way is that, you know, you could say, fuck America, fuck the flag. It stands for imperialism, death to America, right? We're all very familiar with that. The second way is you can say, you know what? This country is full of people who are good, who care about one another. There are really incredible legacies, not only like politically in the United States with the spread and the birth of a certain type of socialism that comes from rural America and metropolitan areas in urban America. So we have our own unique flavor of socialism that was born and bred here, but also just like they're just good humans and just good people, you know. And it's actually, you know, the warmongers actually come from from the side of you know, the political and economic sphere that's always been opposed to those good people, right? And so that's not us. Like, we didn't bomb, you know, Cambodia. We didn't choose, you know, to go into Iraq. It was them, right? It's the ruling class, and they're paid prize fighters, and they have always historically been against us, and so they don't represent us, you know. And so what we fight for, a positive picture, you know, in the midst of a lot of atrocity, you know, and take responsibility when it's necessary, but also hold up a higher set of ideals that are attractive and palatable to the masses. Because again, democratic road to socialism, I'm sorry, the only way we're going to do this is if the vast majority of society agrees with us. And agrees with us, so we have to restructure society in such a way that that this path is beneficial to the many.
Yeah, well, that is very well said. And I'll be honest, I did not expect this result when the conversation started, but fuck if I don't actually feel better.
Hey, glad I could help.
All right. Thanks, Adam. So Adam Proctor is the host of the Dead Pundit Society, which was on a hiatus, but it is now back. They're pumping out that good content again. I'm a patron, and if you join the Patreon, you get regular, like, big beefy, like, B-sides of content that you don't get on the regular podcast feed. So you should check it out. It's good stuff. Always really good to talk to you, Adam.
Thanks for the pitch, and pleasure to chat with you. Let's do it again real soon.
Absolutely. now joined by Daniel Besner, historian, international relations guru, Jacobin man about town. So I was talking to Adam at the end there a little bit about U.S. imperialism, and that ended up being a much better transition than I was thinking that we'd have to talk about an article that you wrote for Jacobin about these war games that happened in 2002. So before we get into the meat of it, like set us up a little bit, right? What was the point supposed to be?
Sure. Well, before we even get into that, I just want to point out the fact that there's a Band-Aid on my head, right? People will be watching this, right, Ben, on video? Yeah. So in the latest adventures of Vera the dog, who people might remember from my last appearance, caused me to go to the vet. Vera got into, she's a genius. She figured out how to basically create a step stool to get on a table where there was a bunch of Jolly Rancher candy. So Courtney, my partner, and I went out, and she had basically a bag, not that much, but a ton of Jolly Rancher candy, and was fucking frantic for like 45 minutes to an hour and a half, some long amount of time. And in her running around the house, smashed into my head, and now I have a Band-Aid. So that is what's going. Totally smashed. She was just super pumped up running, but so I just wanted to apologize for that. But
yeah, I was wondering about that because I remembered you having a Band-Aid on your head.
Also caused.
Okay. I was like, wow, this is a really slow healing cut. All right.
Yeah, it's a different cut actually on the opposite side. She was a Tijuana street dog. And so she's still getting off the mean streets and accommodating herself to civilized life. But just wanted to explain that. But let me get into the war games. So a couple of things. One, I think like the military is just generally an important site of leftist sort of thinking and analysis. I think that like very clearly in most countries throughout most periods of modern history, the military has been a site of reaction, but not always. Most famously, probably the Kiel Rebellion in northern Germany that actually anticipated the end of World War I and helped inspire a series of sort of socialist republics throughout Germany that lasted for a little bit. And of course, you know, the Bolshevik, the Red Army, and things along those lines. Now, I'm not saying like the Red Army itself was a progressive force. There's a long history there, but just saying that like militant action, military action is crucial to any left project. Then even think if you're thinking about today with Trump, right? Like I think we're lucky that the American military is like basically this sort of faceless bureaucracy without charismatic generals, but you know, it wouldn't have been impossible to think that there's some sort of charismatic reactionary general who could have actually put some weight behind Trump's call for a coup. And I think the absence of that is one of the many reasons that there's not going to be that Biden will become president. But it's just, you know, an important side of action. So I just think that like as a space, the military is an important thing for the left to think about. Do you want me to continue, Ben, or do you want to say anything? I was talking for a while.
No, that's good. So yeah, I guess I do want to just plug here that at some undetermined point in the next week, Daniel is going to come on the YouTube stream if you're listening to this as a podcast to talk about the issue that he was just alluding to with Trump and why, you know, I think both of us are not really on the Trump is on the verge of staging a military coup and imposing fascism train, and maybe also more broadly though, you know, what we can learn from thinking about those issues and about some of the debate that's happened about them in the last few years. But yeah, so this is an important, you know, like this is an important subject for leftists to pay attention to, maybe more attention than we typically do, because I think oftentimes on the left, we only notice that the military exists when it starts bombing a new place, where, you know, but there are interesting things that are going on in other contexts, which maybe brings us to the subject of the piece.
Right, right. And it's also something to think about just in case like a future Bernie or let's say President AOC or someone actually does win the presidency. One of the major constituencies in American politics is the military. You know, the Joint Chiefs of Staff have an enormous influence on American foreign policy and also American domestic policy through things like the VA and, you know, military contracts and things along those lines. So it's just something to be aware of. But what I explored in the piece is this event that happened in 2002, really between 2000 and 2002, called the Millennium Challenge, which was a congressionally mandated war game. So just to give a bit of the history of it, the United States wins the Cold War, right? So this is a big event. But I think even more importantly for understanding the direction of military affairs is that soon after the Cold War ends, let's say 1989, 1990, in the turn of 1990 into 1991, the United States, what I was going to say occupies, that's not the right word, fights the first Gulf War, Gulf War I, whatever you want to call it, first Iraq War. And this is actually really important because the United States absolutely destroys Saddam's military in a series of about 4 days. There's about a month of bombardments, if I recall correctly, 30-ish days, followed by basically a 4-day routing of Saddam's army that had invaded Kuwait. Saddam's military, not just his army. And so this was a big deal because Saddam actually had a pretty substantial military. I think at the time, I think it was the fourth most powerful in the world measured by some metrics. That might be wrong. I apologize. I have the data somewhere, but it was a legit military. It wasn't like a fake force. And the US fucking destroyed it. And this basically led to people arguing that there was something called the Revolution in Military Affairs, the RMA, and that this revolution in military affairs was basically defined by the use of advanced technologies, both advanced weapons systems, but also things like GPS, surveillance technologies, radar, and that what advocates of the RMA, the Revolution in Military Affairs, were arguing was that this provided the material basis for the long-standing American dream, which was to make war clean. And as I talk about in the piece, going back to the 20s and the 30s and the advent of planes, metal planes with powerful engines, there was the idea that one would be able to basically end ground wars of the type seen in World War I, these sort of trench warfare, by having planes fly over the trenches, bombing, let's say, an enemy's electrical communication system, their networks of transportation, their logistics networks, whatever, and ending wars quickly. This was the dream of basically people who were in the Army Air Forces, which, as the name implies, was part of the Army, and people who were advocating for Air Force independence, which eventually happens in 1947, were saying that the Air Force had its own strategic logic. That is, it goes above ground troops to destroy an enemy's industrial base, network communication base, as opposed to just aiding ground troops as they go forward. Of course, in World War II, this doesn't quite work out the same way. The Air Force, the American Air Force, still part of the Army, is not able with the Royal Air Force to basically defeat Hitler with just planes. You have D-Day, you have ground invasion. But in the Japanese theater, things look a little bit differently. Things look a little bit different because you do have the so-called island hopping campaigns, but also the war ends with an atomic bomb, right? And this, Air Force advocates argued, was the demonstrating that the Air Force was able to end wars in an instant. And so there's this sick letter sent from Lawrence Norstad, a very high-ranking Air Force official, that says, like, see, strategic bombing is real. We ended the Japanese imperial domination with 2 bombs. It might have killed tens of thousands of people and hundreds of thousands over time, but we ended the war quickly. And so this becomes like still a rationale in American political culture, this in military culture, the search for clean war. And this is what the revolution in military affairs seemed to augur, that you'd be able to have quick, cheap, efficient wars. So Ben, do you want me to clarify anything, and then I could go a little bit more into what happens after that, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think probably that's pretty clear about what the, like what the belief was, right, about what the Gulf War had shown, right? So then what happens with these war games, and how does that relate to that?
Sure. So there's a bunch of people in the military who are arguing in favor of this revolution in military affairs, this RMA. But there's, of course, other people within the military who say this is bullshit. Like, I've been hearing these things since, oftentimes they were Vietnam veterans, and they were like, I've been hearing these things since Vietnam, that technology and quantification and models are going to end wars quickly and cheaply. And in fact, in Vietnam, sometimes the models would show that the Americans were winning when in fact they very much were not. So there's basically, after the Gulf War, a divide between those who support the RMA and those who basically argue that it's bullshit. Now, one of the main people who argued that it was bullshit was this guy named Lieutenant, who was a Marine Corps Lieutenant General named Paul K. Van Riper. His nickname was Rip Van Riper, both a play on Rip Van Winkle and also a play on his last name being Riper. And he was like, no, the RMA is bullshit. So Van Riper
sounds a little bit like the General Jack D. Ripper.
Yeah, very much like Jennifer from Dr. Strangelove. Which is a funny little allusion. But so Van Riper retires from the Marines in 1997, but it's actually not that bad a time in American history to be a retired general, because throughout the 1990s, particularly in the second Clinton administration, there's this push to transform the military. It's called defense transformation. And what is meant by that is that basically your people within the military are trying to incorporate the technologies and the lessons of the revolution in military affairs into doctrine, into the procurement of weapon systems, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the ways that, the military decided to demonstrate first that transformation was something good, and second to determine what to purchase was through war games. So there's this huge surge of war games in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And the people who are hired to play in war games are oftentimes retired generals, because an actual general is busy, he's moving around, he has other duties, blah, blah, blah. So what happens is the defense contractors who run these games, in tandem with the Department of Defense, hire retired generals like Van Riper. And in fact, in I think it's 2000, might be 99, I forget, but 99 or 2000, it's in the article. The American Congress actually passes a law that says in order to prove if transformation works, if it's a thing that we should do, basically, there needs to be this like huge war game, termed the Millennium Challenge. That's not in the congressional authorization, but it eventually becomes known as the Millennium Challenge. And beginning in 2000 and in 2002 is when the Millennium Challenge takes place. And it's a very complex thing that happens between 2000 and 2002, but basically there's a series of different events. They're called spirals that simulate a political standoff that eventually emerges in a war game, the deployment of American troops to a country that's meant to simulate the Gulf War, a country meant to simulate either Iran or Iraq,
Right.
Probably a combination of the two. That is called, which is what people mean by the Millennium Challenge 2002. So just to, and then I'll stop, just to be clear, the whole process between 2000 and 2002 is called the Millennium Challenge,
Right.
and the game is called the Millennium Challenge 2002. And so it's a little complex. And what this article does is that it explicates this game and the controversy around it.
Yeah, I should say, by the way, I never said the name of the article. It's the general who brought down the American Empire. All right. So there's this country that's supposed to be Iran, Iraq, a little bit of each, and that's facing, the war game is a simulation of is acting out, that country facing off against the United States. And if you believe in this revolution in military affairs, then we presumably should be able to. I keep on trying to come up with a clever way to combine Iran and Iraq, but there's no way to do that because they're the same, the same first three letters, and I don't know what to do with that. But Iraqan, right? They had that we should be that presumably, if you believe in the RMA, then we should be able to just flatten Iraqum and succeed, and everything should be good.
Yeah, very quickly. So basically these spirals are like kind of pre-war games, and what eventually leads to this scenario, which is that there's an earthquake in Iraqan, the unnamed Middle Eastern country, and that this earthquake destabilizes the society, which leads a general to separate from basically the religious national leadership and begin to assert control over the territory. This general, who is in the Millennium Challenge 2002, is Van Riper. Van Riper is hired to play this general who has separated from basically the Ayatollah. Let's just say the Ayatollah, and is like seizing territory throughout the Gulf, in particular the Persian Gulf. And so the explicit scenario is that Van Riper, the general, the Iranian general played by Van Riper, has seized a series of islands in the Gulf and has begun to charge shipping companies essentially tolls to ensure safe passage through the Gulf. And this is, of course, a big deal because a ton of raw materials, most importantly oil, is transported through the Gulf every day. And so in response to this, the US government, the so-called Blue Team, basically dispatches an aircraft carrier battle group in order to challenge Van Riper. And this is where the game begins. The game begins at this moment. Van Riper has started charging tolls, and the US military, the US Navy in particular, has been deployed to the Persian Gulf. So should I say what happens?
Yep, please.
So basically the Navy arrives, and the head of the Navy is a guy named Lieutenant General, I believe he's a Lieutenant General, apologies if I'm wrong, B.B. Bell, B-E-L-L, issues Van Riper an ultimatum. He says, you have 24 hours to surrender, otherwise we're going to take you and your forces out. So what Van Riper does, remember, Van Riper is trying to disprove the revolution in military affairs, is that he begins to use low-tech technology. So when the US Navy went into the Persian Gulf, they destroyed, in the simulation, they destroyed basically the sort of secret ways that Van Riper was communicating with his forces. I believe they were supposed to be underground. A lot of this is vague, but I believe they were supposed to be underground, basically, networks. So the Navy destroys these underground communications relays, and then they think that Van Riper is going to have to communicate with cell phones, which are easily monitored by the then current technology of the Navy in early 2000s. But what Van Riper does, he's like, no, I know these guys are going to monitor me, so I'm going to communicate in with basically low-tech ways. So what Van Riper does is that he's given this ultimatum, and he's like, I know the U.S. has adopted a doctrine of preemption, right? George W. Bush says this. The U.S. is going to adopt a doctrine to prevent wars, to preempt wars, and Van Riper says, if they're going to preempt me, I'm going to preempt them. And so he uses motorcycle couriers, right? He doesn't have to communicate on cell phones. He sends motorcycle couriers. When he's trying to tell his planes to take off, he uses light signals, which were used during World War II. And most famously, to initiate his preemptive attack, Van Riper used coded messages in the call to prayer that come from the minarets of this, fake Middle Eastern Muslim country. So Van Riper does this. He secretly initiates an attack. He totally takes the U.S. Navy by surprise. And I believe he winds up in the end sinking 16 of the naval vessels that had been, of the American naval vessels in the simulation that had been dispatched to the Persian Gulf, including one aircraft carrier. And for comparison, I believe during the Pearl Harbor attack, the most disastrous naval event in American history, I believe in the end, it sort of like depends how you count sunken ships, but I believe 4 ships were sunk. So imagine like quadruple that amount. And if this attack were real, 20,000 US soldiers would die. So basically, this low-tech Van Riper attack, which is done by missiles, which is done by planes, which is also done by kamikaze assaults from small vessels, succeeds in the simulation of sinking 16 US naval ships, including an aircraft carrier. So this would basically be like by far the largest naval disaster in American history. And so it totally destroyed what the Navy intended to happen, which is what we think. We haven't gotten the documents, but like clearly they didn't want to lose. They wanted to prove that the RMA was real and that they would be able to take out unnamed Middle Eastern country, Iraq or Iran, in 2002. And even though they were supposed to be like 2007 capabilities, but you could read about that in the thing, but basically that they would be able to take out a Middle Eastern country. And so after Van Riper succeeds in sinking the ships, there's basically a day and a half of stunned silence at the simulation center in Virginia, and the blue team, the American team, decides to refloat the ships, which is actually what would happen in a war game. The problem, though, is that Van Riper, and you could read about more details in the article, had been promised that this game wouldn't be fucked with, that it wouldn't be fixed. Because he had a previous experience where he basically thought a war game was fixed, and he was like, this is fucked up. And they're like, don't worry, the Millennium Challenge 2002 won't be fixed. But anyway, they refloat the ships, and then I won't get into the details because that's the big event. But throughout the next 4, 5, 6 days, as Van Riper continues to play the game, the blue team essentially cooks the books in favor of its winning. And Van Riper eventually resigns, and he leaks this information. Eventually, the details are in the article, and this becomes this whole hullabaloo over whether the U.S. Navy fixed this war game, which I should recall cost, all told, in the 2000, 2001, 2002, cost about $250 million, $250 million, involved 13,500 troops, involved a bunch of I think it's 9 live fire scenarios, even though. So most of the game is simulated in computer systems, and there's like a series of, like you have a computer model that models attacking civil infrastructure. You have a computer model that models artillery fire. So all these models were put together into one gigantic simulation. So most of the game takes place in a simulation, but there will also be like a live exercise, like a Marine will attack a base, and if they capture the base, it'll count as like 15 captured bases in the game. I get into the details in the article. That's not important, but whatever. It was a very important, very expensive, very large game that Van Riper publicly accused of being fixed, and this, has this whole drama around it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess just to pull out a little bit here, right? So this is this massive embarrassment. They put all this money into it. This is supposed to be the proof of concept for the RMA, and instead. It started out being a disaster, and then they kind of decided to, I guess the equivalent in a real war would be like an act of God to intervene to reverse the losses. So what, if anything, did anybody in the military establishment actually learn from this?
So this is like, it gets into the details. So the question is, was the Millennium Challenge a war game or an experiment? If it's a war game, it should be free play, and they shouldn't be able to do things like refloat ships, right? If it's an experiment, then they could be able to refloat ships because of, basically because it allows the experiment to continue. And I think that they were never clear on what this game was supposed to be. I think they wanted it to be a game that proved them right, but that isn't what it turned out to be. So the truth is, like, we don't really know because we don't have access to the discussions and the documents. They might not even exist. But that's my sense, is that they wanted it to be like kind of free play, enough free play to prove that this is what the U.S. military should do. But anyway, so the RMA basically goes relatively unchallenged for several years until the actually James Mad Dog Mattis, who you might remember as Trump's Secretary of Defense, becomes like head of the Marine Corps experimental unit, and he agrees with Van Riper and is like, the RMA is bullshit, and he essentially purges it from the doctrine of what the Joint Forces Command, which also no longer exists. But I think it's important because this is a story that really reflects this long-standing dream in American life, and really in the American political imagination, for clean war, for war that could be made clean. And I think this has become this sort of liberal idea. I think you see it under Obama, the late Obama administration, with the turn towards drone warfare, and I bet you're going to see it in the coming Biden administration. This idea that with enough know-how, enough American ingenuity, enough science and technology, you're going to be able to make war clean. And I think Van Riper, who probably doesn't politically align with socialists, is nonetheless right in that war is really chaotic. It is something that is so fundamentally unmanageable that, as Karl von Clausewitz, the Prussian general, said in the 1810s and 1820s, it's in the wake of the Napoleonic Wars, is that you really can't clear the fog of war. That the dream of clean war is basically bullshit. And that, this liberal fantasy that you're going to be able to make war humane is absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, and which is a particularly disturbing thing to think about, because as Biden comes in, and look, at the best of times, empire is bipartisan, and as I've heard you point out before, there are some, disturbing signs that the Biden administration might be more like the first term Obama administration, the second term Obama administration in terms of its willingness to, to do things for example, like the regime change in Libya that happened under Obama. At the same time, though, the other, side of that empire is bipartisan coin is that there is a lot of ridiculous, bizarre mythology, which is even believed on parts of the left, that the Trump administration was somehow like isolationist or quasi-dovish, and beyond just the most obvious stuff, like, they doubled the rate of drone strikes in Yemen. They tore up the Iran deal. And in fact, they seem to be worried about the possibility that Biden might reverse on that and try to get the Iran deal back, as much as that might actually be difficult at this point, because we've already shown that we can't be trusted, when we negotiate these things. That if there's the next president comes in, can just scrap it like it's nothing. But that they're worried about this, and in fact, I've seen reports that that one of the parting gifts of the Trump administration has been imposing a whole shitload of new sanctions on Iran to try to make it more difficult to restore any sort of diplomatic relations between the U.S. and Iran. And it really seems like the fact that there weren't any, like people say, oh, Trump didn't start any new wars. Like, yeah, okay. He appointed a bunch of horrific, like neocons, to important positions, and they did their best to stir the pot, and nothing that came out of the pot actually developed into a new war. But that's not the sort of thing you should give out Nobel Peace Prizes for.
Yeah, I mean, the important thing in my view is like also to even begin transforming the structure, and just Trump did absolutely none of that. I mean, Trump was like a dangerous and reckless foreign policy president who did absolutely nothing to transform the structure of U.S. foreign policy in a meaningful way.
Yeah.
So yeah.
So what?
Let's not celebrate this.
Yeah. I mean, like, really, this is probably the area where there's the least to celebrate in any possible outcome of an American, election. That's, I mean, there would have been, if we'd gotten Bernie, but yeah. So, I mean, given that I guess I'm just trying to think how to put this, right? So, given that what should be learned from this, from this debacle, I mean, beyond just the fact that it's like, it's a good story. It's like sort of mouth is kind of ajar the whole time you read this, but like that the thing that should be learned from this is about the impossibility of.
Right. So this is what it's kind of interesting. I don't know what you think, but I still think like on the left, there's this idea that we could be like the good empire. I don't think they would ever be framed in that terms, but it's just something that struck out to me. Like a few months ago, I think I posted a question on Twitter about like basically humanitarian intervention, like should we do it, along those lines, and like a lot of people, and most people who follow me are left, were like yes. And I think it's important to emphasize, like I think that the lesson is like war cannot be made clean, it cannot be made humane, it cannot be made cheap in terms of either lives or money, and so like it's just not possible to do that. Basically, it's a fundamentally horrible, chaotic, inhumane thing. And
yeah, well, because it's tricky, right? Because people will say, I mean, I think that presumably lots of people, who are left enough that they follow Daniel Besner on Twitter, would say, like, if confronted with the question at this point, look, should the United States have hundreds of military bases scattered all around the world? Should we be intervening in other countries all the time? They'd say, no, of course not, right? But then if you flatly say, okay, so not ever, then it's a lot harder for a lot of people to sign on to this, because this is so ingrained in our political culture that, I mean, one of the I mean, certainly one of the strangest experiences along these lines in my life was when I was teaching in South Korea, and there had just been actually a U.S. South Korean military exercise that had involved firing on this unoccupied, but like that involved going into what the North Koreans regarded as North Korean territory, although nobody was there, and the North Koreans responded by actually like firing live ammunition on a place where a bunch of people actually did live, and a few of them died, and a bunch of them fled to the other side of the country, right? Because most South Koreans live right by the border, and then the response. I mean, one, it was just bizarre, like seeing how blasé most Koreans I knew were about this. Like, oh yeah, that kind of sucks. This happens, right? But then the South Korean response was to like basically fire a few shells back and say, don't do it again. And I told my students the next day, to put this really into perspective, I come from a country where, when I was a little kid, we invaded Grenada because they were building an airport, and you never know. Right, like that's how we're, it's so ingrained in American culture that like even if you think like, oh yeah, Reagan was going a little nuts with the Grenada thing, that the idea that this is just fundamentally something that we're not in the business of doing is just really really almost outside of the realm of what's thinkable for most people.
And I think that's right. I mean, like I think it's also related to this Puritanism in American culture. This is like millenarian. The idea that like the goal of the United States is to transform the world. And I think a lot of that is still very much evident in this sort of pro-imperialist is too much, but like pro-doing something is sort of the way that I like the idea that the United States needs to like do something, which I think a lot of people on across the political spectrum believe. And so I think that sort of thing is like really, really difficult to overcome.
Yeah, like or even to try to change the conversation to the extent that like, hey, you want to do something? Here's something you could do. You could like, there's some terrible conflict going on somewhere across the world. You want to do something? A thing that we could do would be to take in every single refugee from that conflict who wants to come here. That could count as doing something. But of course, yeah. You say that, most people roll their eyes because that's just not what they mean, and it's not within the boundaries of what we think of as doing something, and maybe and so the the Millennium Challenge, if nothing else, a good reminder that what we actually do have in mind, right? When we talk about doing something, the range of things that we have in mind are things that are impossible to do. In ways that don't have tremendous human costs, certainly, and are also impossible to do in ways that have costs that can be predicted and managed, even on the American side, right? I mean, we have an incredibly powerful empire, but that doesn't actually make us omnipotent.
Right. I mean, I think it's interesting. Like, I feel like we shape the world, but we don't control it. And let's stop shaping it.
Yeah. Well, that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much, Daniel. And when I have you back on the YouTube stream this week, we'll get into the fascism stuff.
Cool. All right, Ben. I'll see you at some point this week.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Bye, brother.
All right, that was Daniel Besner talking about his article, The General Who Brought Down the American Empire. Good stuff. You can find that in Jacobin. I'm now joined by the great David Griscom, as always, for Outlaws and Revolutionaries.
How's it going, Ben?
It's good. Going to be bourbon would be more on brand for Outlaws and Revolutionaries, but it's been a long day. So this is the gonna drink the Ardbeg that's here. So.
Oh, nice. Dude, I've been on this Rowan's Creek. I don't know if you ever had that before, but it's some high quality bourbon, small scale. I think it's the same distillery as where they make Pappy Van Winkle, but don't
Okay, yeah, that's
don't quote me on that.
Nice. So before we get into the music, I did just want to share with people. So earlier today, as we're recording this, you shared this tweet with me that I'm not even going to say who tweeted it, because I might have I don't want to I don't want to direct
hatred toward this one person.
I don't want to direct hatred towards this person. I might have accidentally done a little bit of that earlier anyway. But I will just say what the tweet says, right? So it was a discussion of MAGA voters, and this person says, and I quote, I saw a documentary that explored the question about why Black people didn't turn to nationalist populism like whites did in the places where factories closed. Answer was basically that white people have unreasonable expectations about how easy their lives would be. And then I can't read it anymore because the person, after I said something about this earlier, they said, set their Twitter account to private, which is why I feel bad about it. I'm not going to say who they are, but in the subsequent tweets, as I recall, they go into explain that the meaning of people thinking that they're having unrealistic expectations about how easy their lives would be was that they could graduate from high school and then get a job at a factory, which, by the way, I don't know. I've never had that dubious pleasure myself, but I certainly know people who've had jobs at factories, and if you associate that with having an easy life, I just don't know what to tell you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, man. I mean, just to jump on it, it's like it's a very frustrating sentiment. And again, not to direct this at one person, it's actually just more of, this is somebody saying something that actually has said a lot, and it's a kind of way of thinking that I think is really harmful. Because look, there are a lot of like in-depth studies, like look at like Malaika Jamali's work on like Rust Belt voters, and there has been this mythology of like who the Trump voter is, and I think there's nothing wrong with pointing that out. But when you're operating from the kind of like realm of speculation, which this person is with this tweet, it's so unhelpful to take this position, which is essentially that people advocating for fair wages, time off of work, the expectation that your children should be able to attend a school, that you shouldn't be mired in debt and have your house foreclosed on, that those are unreasonable expectations. And it's frustrating how successful this messaging has been, which is sort of like, it counters itself in like a kind of progressive, argument that it's like, oh, people need to recognize the extreme racial inequities in society, which of course they need to do. But what's so weird about this argument is that like to achieve like racial equality or to fight against white supremacy, we actually need to lower the standard of living for working class people across the country, right? It's like that's not a revolutionary or a radical perspective. It's quite actually reactionary.
Oh yeah, right. I mean, presumably, like that's the opposite of the kind of equality that anybody should want. This is, it's like if the grand success of the civil rights movement had been making like everybody use the substandard facilities, that Black people have been forced to use under Jim Crow. Like that's not a victory, right? Like and similarly here. And again, I think that like the thing about this tweet is not that it's like is not what's particular to it. It's what's like it's that it's such a perfect distillation of what we've been seeing so much in the last few years, which is this vision of liberalism or progressivism that says that one fetishizes non-white people in a way that's actually like, you know, pretty sketchy in itself, right? You know, and two, that it says, and again, the issue here is not actually like how accurate it is that like that people in areas with factory layoffs actually have gravitated towards this MAGA stuff or not, right? Like that's not the point. The point is that they're saying that thinking that somebody who hasn't won the rat race to secure one of the few positions that are available in the professional managerial class, thinking that nonetheless they should be able to work hard and by working hard make a good living and support their family and have their needs met, is having unrealistic expectations about how your life should go. Is like, God damn it, that is just like drinking in the capitalist realism and just into your soul.
Yeah, and it's just like, you know, this is like Tori Reid's like whole point, is that there's been this kind of like revisionist history, for example, of the New Deal, that the New Deal was, you know, the New Deal was only possible like through enacting like a form of you know, of being like a, you know, racist essentially, right? It's just like, you know, because the outcomes like were not enjoyed equally across these different populations. The problem is that like basic social democratic programs themselves, you know, are the problem, instead of what Tori Reid says. Like the problem with the with the New Deal is that it wasn't universal enough, right? The problem with the New Deal was when it was being you know, leveled out or distributed very unequally, and like the answer to that is, you know, actually more universalism. You know, it's just like, it just is really important.
Yeah. Also, just on that historical note, it is really worth noting a couple things that often get left out of this discussion, which are that having social insurance programs leave out, for example, a lot of agricultural workers is actually pretty common, even in a lot of European countries, where the dynamics weren't like racialized the way that they were with the kind of Jim Crow apartheid that you had in the US, just because these sort of reactionary big landowners like exerted lots of political influence in lots of countries, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a pretty common dynamic. But then the second thing is that, yeah, it is true that because of these you know, very racialized power structures, especially in the South, you know, not solely there, but like the ones that are most relevant to these kind of carve outs for the New Deal, that lots of that there were people who were sharecroppers, who were domestic servants, who had other positions like this that Black people were much more likely to hold than white people, who were locked out of some of the New Deal benefits. That's true, and it's important. And the Tori Reid thing is obviously the right takeaway from that. But also, the New Deal was a massive benefit for Black workers in the United States, and especially the combination of the New Deal programs per se, and something that was really enabled by the same wave of reform, which was the rise of big industrial unions in the, you know, these centers like Detroit, which actually, without that, Black population patterns in the 20th century would be incomprehensible, right? Like that, like why do you get migration, you know, that you do at the time that you do? And also voting patterns would be incomprehensible. That the swing to FDR among Black voters in 1936 was like the kind of swing that's like you just don't get like in any normal. It was like one of the most dramatic voting changes in American history, because even despite these like ugly compromises with Dixiecrats, these programs actually did massively benefit a lot of the poorest people in the United States, you know, who are disproportionately Black. So this idea that the New Deal was you know, was somehow like just for white people, or it wasn't relevant to Black people, or especially that shows that universalist programs aren't relevant, you know, to Black people, you know, which is particularly insidious in a way that gets back to the point of the tweet, because when people are saying that, they're saying, oh, well, instead of doing these economic programs to help people, you know, who are, you know, like to help the like great mass of people who are suffering, what you should do is you should just really focus on the social justice issues regarding who gets to jump from the working class into the professional managerial class, which is what this person thinks if you have realistic expectations
Yeah.
about how easy your life should be, that's what you should have to do. You should have to go to college and go to graduate or professional schools and get this, by definition, right, like relatively
Yeah.
small number of spots, which is in fact going to leave most poor people out in the cold. And of course, as we know, because the racial dynamics of American history, that's a category that's going to be disproportionately non-white.
Yeah, I mean that's exactly it. And just people, we all have to be wary and pay attention to this, because there is a class of, political commentators and a political class in this country that knows that this is a highly successful way to message with people. Because I just have to say again, it's like, a lot of this stuff actually I think is quite earnest from people who are like, I want to do the right thing and I want to help people. And there's just this ideology out there that's being pushed, as I was saying, by political class and a political elite. To try to make it seem like actually any kind of more radical reform, or hell, just like returning to a New Deal form of politics is somehow opposed to fighting for like racial justice, right? And it's an incredibly disingenuous and wicked framing, and we just need to be a little bit bolder, I think, about starting to call it out, because it's really unhelpful.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, the thing that always repeating here, like that, the classic civil rights victories were won by people who saw racial and economic justice as inseparable, right?
Yeah.
It's the March on Washington for jobs and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, there's a reason why that's the perspective that was had by the people who are the most serious about this. And there's a reason why that's the perspective that's most likely to assemble, winning coalitions. And anything else, like, I mean, and this is the part that like really go to what you were just saying about calling it out, like anything else, like no matter how it disguises itself, right? Like this is just like the ideology of a certain kind of narrow band
Mm-hmm.
of well-educated professionals, which whatever, like, is a club that in an ambiguous way I've been in, but like it's not a club that most people ever have been or ever will be in or ever
Mm-hmm.
could be in, because it's just structurally impossible for you to have an economy where most people are, doctors and lawyers and managers and professors. Like that
Mm-hmm.
can't happen. And so either you want to do something for everybody else, right, or you don't, and that's what it gets down to.
No, absolutely.
Speaking of which, actually, this all reminds me. I should plug that that you did a really good video for Jacobin. You and I have both been doing these quick takes for the Jacobin
Mm-hmm.
YouTube channel, and you just did one on how socialism could win in Texas, and people should check that out.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. That was a fun one for sure. I was frustrating subject matter, because we sort of broke down Joe Biden and the kind of state Democratic Party, National Democratic Party's complete failure of a strategy, but hopeful in the sense that I try to lay out a little bit of a groundwork for what we can do differently and win.
Yeah, right. The pitch. Like let's not say anything that'll spook anybody who lives in a suburb. Shockingly enough, like. That might get you, like that doesn't deliver blowouts. Like I don't know.
I don't know what they were thinking. It's just lazy. I mean, honestly, not to go too far. It's just lazy, man. It's just thinking that after being completely eviscerated by the rise of George Bush in a state that was solidly blue forever, right? That somehow you're just going to have this demographic shift, and you're just going to somehow, one day wake up and like, oh man, the state's completely different. Instead of having to do what you should always want to do in politics, which is campaign and show people why you're going to improve their lives and, build a political organizations that are in touch with working people. They don't want to do any of that. There is just like this euphoria about this strategy, the demographics are destiny, which is just showing in real time to be a real disaster, and one that I think could be really disastrous for the Democrats in the party, because the Republicans are starting to outflank them with groups like, specifically Latinos. I mean, Democrats are still winning by large margins there, but like the Republicans are eating into those margins big time. And you can actually see a situation where, those populations just really flip in a way that would be devastating.
It's so bizarre to just count on, like when people say demographics is destiny, like they're just counting on all Republican candidates forever forward, like, for eternity being exactly as openly racist as they are now.
Yeah, and also I might.
Why would you think they're gonna cooperate with that? Like, if they were really starting to lose every election, don't you think they would adjust?
Yeah, no, I think so. That's 100% right. And I would also just add, and then even if you believe that, just like specifically in the state of Texas, the party is doing everything that it can do to keep out, like Latino organizers, like into positions of leadership in the party. It's just like, they're not even following through with their own, prescription of, what the path forward is. It's a disaster. But that is an opportunity for us to beat them,
No, fair
That's
enough.
how I look at
Fair
it.
enough. I like that. Well, cycling back to expectations about how hard one's life is going to be, let's talk about country music.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what we got this week?
We got one of my personal favorites, a little bit different from the ones we've been doing in the sense that this guy's, younger, and he's still making music today. Jamie Johnson. Jamie Johnson is one of my favorite artists. I've been lucky to see him play multiple times, seen him play with Willie Nelson, which was a complete mind-bending performance and a wonderful evening. He's by far one of my favorite country music artists, not least because he was really the person who was like my bridge from the kind of pop garbage I was listening to, on the radio, to, this real outlaw country. Not that I hadn't listened to it before growing up and had a love for it, but he really built that bridge for me in my early teens. But yeah, man. So Jamie Johnson, he's contemporary, but he definitely is in that outlaw music spirit. And I can't remember who he was quoting, but he was saying in an interview that outlaw country, it's less of a style and it's very much an attitude. Because if you think about people who we consider to be outlaw country, it's like George Jones, who is very traditional country in a lot of ways. Waylon Jennings, who's like, rock and roll. Willie Nelson, who, is Willie Nelson, and it's, he's in a category of his own. Anyways, the point is there's no oh, this is the style that if you hear this certain sound, this is outlaw country. Right. It was really about people who were breaking the rules and standing up against the record executives and making their own kind of music and saying, I'm not going to do it that way. So I love that definition that he gave. And he, 100% is one of these people who, lived that outlaw creed. One of a favorite song of mine is a song he wrote between Jennings and Jones. Which is, being between Waylon Jennings and George Jones. And he says, well, the day job I landed felt just like a jail. I couldn't seem to break out with that hammer and nail. I spent all my nights in some old honky tonk somewhere between Jennings and Jones. And it's just that's real as it gets. I mean, that's not only knowing the music, but also knowing the people who are out there listening to the tunes. And it was and that was Jamie Johnson's life. His first real big record. I wonder if this will work, but I can't do it.
Kind of for a second, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I keep on trying. I don't know why. I think it's going to work this time. But his first big record was a record called That Lonesome Song, which came out in 2008. And I got to say, I think it's definitely the best country music record that came out, at least by anybody new in the 2000s. I might even put it in there as one of the best country records that's been put out in the last 20 years, just in this uniqueness and just breaking from the garbage, honestly, that was coming out. But he wrote that album after, so he had basically had limited commercial success. He had, just sort of been rolling around Nashville for a little bit, writing songs here and there that got picked up, but nothing really happening. He wrote a song called Honky Tonk Badonkadonk, and if you're not from the South, you probably haven't heard it, but it was a Trace Adkins song. I mean, it's just it's just pop country through and through. It's a little funny. I liked it back then, but it's not the music that he wanted to be making. And also before he put out Lonesome Song, he did write George Strait's Give It Away. Which he does Jamie Johnson does an incredible live version of that, which you can find on YouTube, that I think rivals the George. No offense to the King. It's a recording of it. But anyways, those were his commercial success. And, he was going through this nasty divorce. He was making music, and a lot of it wasn't music that he really liked. He had this record that came out that it was very much overwritten in the kind of Nashville scene, put him in a cowboy hat, whole deal. He's from Alabama. It's you know what I mean? Stereotypical, okay, we'll make you a star. Here's our template. And it didn't work for him. It didn't work for the record company either, because they dropped him after none of his singles got picked up. And he was just drinking a lot. He thought to himself, this is no way to live. So he spent a year completely sober and wrote this album, Lonesome Song. And man, I'm telling you, that album brought something out of me. It came out in such a dark time in country music when it was just so poppy. And when Jamie Johnson first started showing up on the radio or on like CMT, it was just, you were being transported to another time, just another, another president in a lot of ways, where country music hadn't taken this kind of poppy route and returned to its like soul. That Lonesome Song, the title song of this album, man, it's just a badass track. People need to, definitely check it out. It's beautiful, soulful. It's about a song that, no one else can sing along to because it's a lonesome song. It's just like railroad country, outlaw country, dobro, all that stuff. The song people might be familiar with, because this is what sort of drove this record to fame, was In Color, which is a really beautiful song about, looking at some pictures with your grandfather and he's remembering all these incredible moments in his life. That's the one that probably, straddles that line between the kind of pop country of the era and the rest of the album. But I'm telling you, it's a through and through a phenomenal track, and it has its place on the record. But the rest of that Lonesome Song is great. A lot of good divorced dad songs in it. Mowing Down the Roses is a song about him mowing down the roses that his ex-wife planted in the yard, just like a pure kind of like angry drunk, kind of going through a divorce. It's an album too, in the purest sense. Like, all the songs sort of blend into each other. There's sort of bonus tracks in between, the first half and the second half, a lot of just sort of like, riffing going on. Which is really beautiful. And it's just, in a time where records too, like the idea of putting out a record, something that you listen to from start to finish, is starting to die out. It was a really incredible thing to do. And like, I listened to that on CD because like the vinyl movement hadn't really blown up then. And even on CD, it was such a treat to just put on track one and listen all the way through to the final song there is Between Jennings and Jones. Another couple good songs from that album. The Last Cowboy is phenomenal. Women is a great jam. High Cost of Living is incredible moving song about sort of being down and out and just sort of waking up hungover in your car, and realizing that you need to find a change. There's a line in there where he's looking at a cross, realizing that he was lost. Just good country music about sort of being at your bottom and sort of realizing something else needs to happen. But just somebody who gets what life's like. And Jamie Johnson, he grew up in Alabama. He learned to sing in the church. His dad had a guitar that he was never allowed to touch. He doesn't think it was anything too fancy, but it was just something that was too holy for him to ever play as a little kid. After high school, he went off into the Marines. He spent years in Nashville just working construction jobs, trying to break in, playing out, beat down honky tonks. As I said earlier, a little success here and there, but you know how that life goes. It's like you get a check and they don't get nothing for years at a time. And then he comes out with his 2008, that Lonesome Song. But I must suggest, if people are interested in listening to him, you really got to get into his performances on YouTube. As Ben knows all too well, I'm very prone to send out a few of Jamie's tracks on a late night thumper. I mean, he is incredible on the guitar, and it really lends itself to those live performances. Some of his great live performances on YouTube to check out is he does a cover of Leonard Skinner's Four Walls of Rayford, which, for people who aren't familiar with that song, is just a real human song about a veteran who comes back from Vietnam, and he just can't get back into society. He has this line here that always gets me. It goes, well, when Vietnam was over, there was no work here for me. I had a pretty wife awaiting and the 2 kids I had to feed. I'm one of America's heroes, and when they shoot me down, because he's going to be executed, won't they fly Old Glory proudly and put my medals in the ground? I'm coming home to see you, Jesus. Well, it feels so close this time. Please take mercy on the soldier from the Florida-Georgia line. And then, whatever people want to get worked up about, anything praising the troops, it's very much, getting in touch with a kind of real person. People who came back and there was no opportunity in the society, and a lot of people turned to like petty crime, and punishments are very hard down south. Just a couple more before we end. He came with another album, The Guitar Song, which is a good album. It's not as great as Lonesome Song, but there's a lot more like kind of working class mentality and anger in that I wanted to share. One of my favorite songs from it is a song called Poor Man's Blues, where he's basically talking about his confrontation with a rich guy that he's seeing. He says, talking about this rich man, he thinks his money rules this world and he don't give a damn about a low-class backwoods country boy from deep South Alabama. He uses folks like me just to keep his sorry ass amused. Well, son, you better watch your back when a poor man gets the blues. And that's definitely, I put that up there with Oni in a lot of ways, just like kind of, working class people being pissed at the rich folks. I got to say, his guitar is a really fun thing. His guitar, Old Maple, is Epiphone EJ200. I don't know if many people will be familiar with that, but let me share the screen oh, never mind, I can't do that. Check it out, Old Maple is his guitar. I have the exact same guitar because I figured if it's good enough for Jamie, it's good enough for me. He picked it up for like $400. It's a cheap guitar when he got out of the Marines. It's a big-ass jumbo guitar, which is why I love it and why he likes it too. But before he was big, he got Willie Nelson to sign it outside of a concert in Alabama. And so you have Willie Nelson's signature on it, and he made that a kind of tradition. And wherever he played with one of the greats, he gets him to sign it. So his guitar that he plays on is just covered in signatures. And I always love that when you see guys who, they really love, they love what they're doing. They love being able to play with people. Just last couple quick things, just because it's worth noting, the kind of controversy thing. He got in a lot of trouble recently because he canceled a concert in Myrtle Beach because he was so pissed because the House of Blues there was making his band go through metal detectors and didn't appreciate being treated like a terrorist, which is a funny story, but a story that, and he's a little bit different from these other guys. I wouldn't try to paint his politics one way or the other. I think it's kind of, just kind of that free-spirited American style that, I appreciate. But a story that I really do like, is he refused to play this concert. He's delayed it by a real long time. I can't remember where, I'm thinking Oklahoma, but I might be wrong about that. He refused to play this concert because someone was in there, flying one of those Blue Lives Matter flags. And he goes up there and he says, I don't know what that flag means to you, but the flag I stand for is red, white, and blue. Basically got the crowd to force that person to lower into a blue and black flag and get out of there, which was fun. And yeah, man, I've been lucky to see him play live. He's incredible, still playing. His music is worth checking out. And, a good example of how, the music is in a rough place right now, but it's not dead by any stretch of the imagination.
I like that. Can't really improve on that as a closing line for the segment. Thank you, David. Always really appreciate it.
Of course, man.
All right. See you soon, brother.
See ya.
That was the great David Griscom joining us as always for Outlaws and Revolutionaries. Before that, you heard my former co-host of my previous podcast, Adam Proctor, who is still hosting Dead Pundit Society. You should check that out. And actually managing to give me some useful sense of perspective about the state of the left, going forward, that the things that we thought we'd planted and were uprooted, but the soil is just as fertile. So that actually, the whole thing actually did, oddly enough, work out to sort of be a pep talk. Then Daniel Besner, frequent guest, friend of the show, talking about his Jacobin article, "The General Who Brought Down the American Empire." So I am. There's been some good stuff going on. I had a debate with the pro-life activist Kay Fellows, which premiered on the Give Them an Argument YouTube channel on whenever that was, Tuesday, I believe. Also, we did the very first Sopranos recap bonus episode with Nando Villa, Wozni Big Waz Lambre, and Mike Racine, which, if you're listening to this as a podcast, you've seen it on your podcast feed. If you're watching it on YouTube, you should go check it out on the YouTube channel. That was a lot of fun and really looking forward to it. We were talking about doing the first 2 episodes, but we only got through the first episode, so it'll be a long, slow ride, but it's one that I'm looking forward to. Season 1, episode 2, 46 long. We're going to be talking about sometime in December. That first one was just released right away to the YouTube channel. In the future, since it's going to be doing more patron bonus content, so it's probably going to go to patrons first and then get unlocked in a week or something. Meanwhile, speaking of patron bonus content, there is going to be a conversation I already had, but hasn't been edited and released yet, with Jesse Single from Blocked and Reported, where we got into a lot of the kind of controversies that he often covers there. I made my case to Jesse that Barry Weiss is, I believe the way I put it was legitimately one of the stupidest pieces of shit who's ever been given a major media platform. And he gave me a more nuanced take on that controversy. We also talked about Glenn Greenwald, some internet free speech stuff, police abolitionism, a lot of other things. So good stuff. Check that out if you're on the Patreon. I've been trying to, everybody, just on the podcast feed, on the YouTube channel, everybody's always going to get the full episode every single week. I'm never going to paywall any part of this. But I have been trying to produce more good patron stuff because I am immensely grateful for the solidarity and support for people who do sign on to the Patreon. Obviously that helps us pay everybody who's on the show. Not all of whom are getting paid yet, but really want everybody who works on this to be getting a living wage from it. Ultimately, I would like to get one myself so I can do more of this and less teaching. But in any case, so if you can do that, it's the monthly cost of a milkshake, the 50s Nostalgia Diner and Pulp Fiction. So please do consider that. Really appreciate it. If you can't, please rate or review wherever you're listening to this as a podcast, or like and subscribe on YouTube. Those things do make a difference. And I've been really happy to see how many people have already been doing all of those things in the very short time that the podcast has existed. Not entirely, okay, well, I guess I'll say this, right, that coming up next week, the great Anna Kasparian is returning to the podcast. So I am really looking forward to that conversation. Coming up at the beginning of December sometime, I'm going to be doing a debate about worker cooperatives and capitalism with Milton Friedman's son, David Friedman. I watched a debate that David Friedman did with a friend of the show, Richard Wolff, a while back. And I really wanted to take a crack at him. So that should be coming up at the beginning of December sometime. A little later in December, speaking of Richard Wolff, I'm going to be participating in a kind of online academic conference sort of thing that we're doing to honor the legacy of Michael Brooks. So basically a bunch of academics who were on the Michael Brooks show over the years are going to be doing something. Again, that's going to be online. It's going to be happening in December. I'm not 100% sure about the schedule on that, but I will certainly update you guys when I have more information. But meanwhile, just like really sincerely, thank you for watching. Thank you for liking and subscribing. Thank you to the people who have signed on as patrons. It all means a lot to me. I will see you guys next week. Left is best.